Hello, everyone. My name is Keegan Merifern. Welcome to Literacy Practices in Social Studies. The presentation before you is a Zoom format and a way to kind of get a little bit more of my face on the screen to face of the voice. This is going to be presented in a YouTube link. So as it goes along, I ask that some of the feedback, if you guys plan to do it that way, leave a comment with a timestamp on it or a section stamp on it, so that way I know what kind of we're talking about and what section to go back on. However, also please feel free to interact with time and section stamps in the Canvas discussion post. So without further ado, let's get going. A little bit of roadmap we're going to be talking about today. Brief introduction is going to go over the project setting, area of study, and relation to scaffolding. The setting for this project is going to take place in an upper level high school classroom, hopefully that of a psychology classroom. So that's going to kind of be the relationships that we're talking about with literature is in that psychology classroom context. And the relation to scaffolding kind of goes along with a piece that I did on understanding the psychology of motivation. That's going to cover extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So some of the scaffolding references that I talk about with these literacy practices are going to be in relation to that context alone. However, they are definitely applicable to a lot of other historical concepts, whether it's assessing primary source documents, historical figures, biographies. A lot of those mediums are all encompassed with these readings and the findings. Again, I don't know if this is in the way, but I'm going to move it here. Cool. So a hypothetical classroom. As we talked a little bit, it's going to be upper level high school social studies classrooms with social studies applications. A little bit of ELA standards working here as well, but I think that they all kind of generally apply to some of our higher level social studies disciplines. Scaffolding, again, is in relation to our textbook, Latimer, 2010. So going into a little bit of a pre-reading. We're going to go over educator responsibilities and front-loading knowledge. In the pre-reading activity, Reisman and colleagues in 2018 really talked about the sense of educator responsibility to anticipate struggle points. What they mean by that is the educator, yes, decides a reading for the curriculum, of course. However, in going forward, they are kind of taking a step back as a hopefully disciplined, familiar individual at the least, right? And you are kind of looking at it and assessing both, what you want to assess for that reading, and really understanding that if I'm a beginner, if I'm a novice, as a student might be, this is an area that I really want them to be able to understand, or this is an area that I think they might have struggled with. So in that understanding, really start to face those pre-reading and beginning reading activities and focus activities you have them do on those struggle points. So this is really evident in the scaffolding where the turn and talk. So in assessing a little bit of vocab terms, maybe a little synopsis or just the abstract of a discipline-specific text, having those turn and talk prompts really be about points in the reading where you think that it's going to be the most struggle, or a really key concept that you really want them to talk about. Not necessarily just having on the slideshow, all right, everyone, tell me 3 things that you learned about the reading. They can tell you anything. So really, in terms of facilitating and kind of scaffolding literally the discussion for the rest of class, having them interact with those prompts at an earlier point in the lesson, as opposed to kind of like having them reread, go back and be like, did anyone catch this? Like have them already thinking about that before they even start, because you took the time to disappoint that struggle point. And again, Reisman and Weinberg in 2008 talking about front-loading knowledge. This kind of talks about the premise for their reasoning in this article was really talking about taking the load off the student's shoulders of the kind of daunting task of assessing both new concepts and new vocabulary. So I thought for the scaffolding projects having to do with this one was going over this key vocabulary that you want students to be able to understand. In my scaffolding project, it was extrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivation, drive, success, applicability. So those were the terms that we would have discussed, and essentially allows them to be familiar and already have investigated those terms as to what they mean and what their definition is. So when they see them in that discipline-specific text, they're able to realize, oh, I know what that means. So now I can really focus on what's before and what's after that text. That allows me to then combine both my already understanding and how I can apply this like contextually. In the meme there too. So kind of what do people who study psychology really do know what you're thinking? Kind of do. If you have the responsibility and anticipating the struggle points, they're like, how did Mr. M know that I was going to struggle there? This is not changing. Go in a professional mindset. We're going to talk about familiarity, inspiring confidence, and again, battling kind of text complexity. So in Inspiring the Professional Mindset, Hind and colleagues in 2004 talked about inspiring this disciplined, capable mindset of having students, before they even interact with the reading, having them in a strong stance of how they're able to interact with discipline-specific literature in your classroom, whether it be new videos, new text, whether it be new video or new text, having them already confident in their ability to interact as a, in my case, as a psychological student, psychological expert, psychological professional. So they're able to have that sense of familiarity with reading concepts and use pre-existing knowledge of what you covered in the unit before, or what you really just told them in the pre-reading aspect of the class, to have a stronger sense of, yes, this is something that I can do. Yes, this is a very complex text as opposed to qualitative and quantitative means, but because I have this background in the knowledge, and because educators supporting that, yes, this is something that we understand, this is complex, it's going to be complex because you never read it before. So really, in setting in that mindset, Hayden and colleagues had done a study where they had educators who did inspire that mindset, that was kind of leading to increased autonomy, a lot of discussion base as to, we've covered this, and a lot of their language, yes, is a literacy practice, but a lot of it occurred in the language of the educator, and found that those educators that deployed those tactics in getting their students ready and prepared for new reading, those students actually scored higher on reading post-test, as opposed to the control condition who did not, who was kind of more basic as like a subordinate and a learner type understanding, like you kind of learning up to some professional of psychology. Continuing on to autonomy. We're going to talk about peer over subordinate. As we're talking a little bit professional mindset, you want to kind of be at an even level in assessing those texts, as opposed to, we're trying to climb this mountain to get to that text. Kind of want to make them on keel, make them at a level where they're like, yeah, this is something that I can do. And then again, thinking about authentic assessment. So autonomy and cultural relevance. Sveti and Pearson, 2012, students relating to the lesson in their own terms. High levels of autonomy and application outside sources, strong stance of literacy piece, and greater retention. So in their article, they talked about using certain, like understanding that students are definitely in a different place. We talk about it in differentiating all the time, like certain students have different strengths in which they're able to present knowledge, present their understanding of information. So using that in your classroom, not necessarily having specific avenues that you're forcing students down to understand a topic, keeping your standard essentially a little bit more on the, not vague per se, but a little bit more on the open to interpretation side. Yes, having clear criteria, but allowing the means in which they meet that criteria very fluid and very open. This, again, the greater sense of autonomy to learning, kids can take it in their own hands and relate it how they want to. But in the same token, it also requires that students do have the strong understanding of the class concept to be able to relate it to their own personal lives or their own meaning of expression, right? You can't kind of have a loose interpretation and put forth, expression, then you're like, yeah, you really don't get it. But having students have that strong sense because of the literacy practice you deployed earlier in the lesson allows them to, yes, be able to relate this to their personal lives, end all be all, kind of allowing them to retain this information better. Because, like, for example, in Latimer's vocabulary scavenger hunt, requires hands-on research and real-life examples. So say I'm grasping with extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in psychology. Extrinsic motivation being outside rewards working on behavior, and intrinsic being internal rewards focusing influencing behavior. An extrinsic motivator could be Aaron Rodgers having the highest NFL contracts of the season so far. So that is an extrinsic motivator working on him to exceed and succeed in the football arena. So having that relation, I now have a solid understanding of what extrinsic motivation is, as well as a solid understanding of how that is seen and used in real life. Yes, Aaron Rodgers definitely isn't active in psychology. Primus is not necessarily a psychology figure, arguably, but I'm now able to put this places in my life, whether it be sports, whether it be literature, art, music, cinema, like even fictional characters, TV, cartoons. All of those practices do require that strong sense of the literacy piece, literary device. And that again shows to be an authentic assessment because you are able to allow the students to relate that to their specific area of expertise, of their expressive points. So very authentic to them, very influence on retention. We're going to end it out with accessibility. So accessibility, Dalton 2014 talks about the use and the continued use of the digital era for differentiation. Now, what he means by that is kind of understanding that things do tend to continue to move fast as to technology that's available, expressive means that are available. We all saw like our generation, the new thing was TikToks. That's a new like bite-sized clips that are able to be presented, and especially even more so memes. Memes are evident in almost everywhere we go nowadays. So that's an expressive meme. So their premise was allowing students to differentiate to use, similar to what we were talking about with autonomy, really having that set standard where you have a standard, you have grading criteria, you have the right or wrong way that you are going to be able to interpret a student's understanding. You have standards, but letting the students differentiate themselves to like leaving it open-ended, like having the trunk as your standard and allow like all the branches and all the leaves to continue to be a part of that standard, just different. No leaf is the same, just allowing it all to kind of relate to how you want to assess for this piece. Understanding that this is not really feasible for every assessment. You kind of have to assess a little bit every day, but in particular, like summative assessments, Dalton really talked about this being a great way to really wrap up a unit or wrap up a core concept that educators spend a lot of time on. So allowing this to be fluid and creative, and the work on the University of Canvas in 2021 really talked about the benefits of meme generation, because you have to have, again, that strong knowledge of the concept to be able to display it in a clear and concise manner that memes are. You don't see memes with paragraphs of text. It's not a good meme. A little bite-sized piece of really showing you understand the information. So like we see here, our friend Bernie. So as educators, I am once again asking you to express yourself in a way that you deem fit to show your understanding of this concept, because there's not necessarily a one-way street in our practice. It can come from everywhere. A student can understand topic in multiple ways that we're not even aware of. And that's kind of what Dalton continues to talk about, is understanding the digital era is fast paced and there's going to be different means of expression, and being willing and kind of working it in when it's applicable to be open to those different means of expression. That does conclude our presentation on literacy practice in the social studies setting. Understanding this is going to be a YouTube link. Please leave a comment and a timestamp if it's I think an area I can improve on a little more. And again, stamps for our Canvas discussion as to what section in particular you thought was insightful, you thought could use a little work, or you have some insight to add. I'm very open to the criticism and the advice. I know you all are respected educators. Also, my UWM email is available to have questions as well. So I'm going to stop the recording after my sources. Thanks, guys.